Hi everyone, this is What's It Fox Gaming here. This video is to show you the best loadouts that you can possibly use for running all legendary content. I do want to make a small disclaimer at the start here that these builds are not necessarily easy to farm for or put together, but bear in mind that legendary content is the hardest content in the game. So if you or your clan are in a position where you want to start pushing these three strongholds, then I'm going to give you some tips and some build recommendations. There are only really three classes that you want to consider playing. DPS, which is essentially your hard-hitting, kill-everything class. A healer, particularly if it's your first time running through. And then a CC build, which is probably the most important. My clan mostly run 3 DPS with one, with one CC guy, crowd control. But if it is your first sort of, fray into these legendaries, then I would actually recommend that you run 2 DPS, 1 healer and 1 CC. It will take longer, but it drastically reduces your chance of a wipe, particularly if you are unfamiliar. So, what I've seen in the past when we've pulled people from LFG that are looking to do legendaries is, without being rude to these people, they have incredibly subpar builds, not very optimized at all. And I don't recommend that anybody, queue for legendary with, a very poorly thought out build. So the point of this video is just to help anybody that genuinely doesn't know what a good build looks like, maybe is a bit new to the game, because all you're going to find is a lot of difficulty and sort of pain and stress if you queue for a legendary mission. Your build isn't great and you end up getting kicked, or you just feel bad because you're letting your team down by always dying. So yeah, this build is going to sort of go through that. So we'll start off, what do I have here? So I've got a DPS setup. Let's start with that. A healer setup here, and then a CC setup. So the DPS, you don't necessarily have to run coyotes here, you can run something different. Some people like to run Hollow Man for the damage to health, which is great against dogs, or some people potentially run Contractor's Gloves here and have 3 Providence. But as a bare minimum, you want the 3 Providence because you need the headshot damage as well as a critical hit chance and damage. If you're struggling to get your critical hit chance up and you haven't got your watch level very high, I would admittedly encourage getting your watch level at least to 500 before you start pushing legendary, but for whatever reason you haven't, you may want to consider running a Seska, which gives you critical hit chance. But for my personal recommendation, you want to be running Coyotes, and only one of you in your team wants to run that. 3 Providence, a Grupo Sombra for the critical hit damage, and Fox's Prayer, just because you're going to be running M1As here. I personally run 2 M1As, one with Boomerang. This is the important one, by the way. Don't worry about your Baker's Dozen. The Perfect Lucky Shot is a rubbish talent, and it's really not needed. If you want to be hitting these legendary contents frequently, you don't really want to be relying on a weapon that rewards you for missing your shots, because obviously you don't want to be missing. I do run a second M1A with Rifleman. This is really good for your more stationary targets that have headshots, so like your heavies and so on. Landing headshots grants quite a lot of extra weapon damage, but I rarely use this, to be fair, unless it's like a heavy, a chain chunga coming out, the big sort of heavies with the chain railguns. Boomerang is your best friend here. You absolutely want an M1A with as high rifle damage as you can. Mine's pretty pants, to be fair, and damage to targets out of cover. So farm for this whenever rifles is up. This exact combination of perks and attributes is what you want. You want to have maximum crit hit damage and chance across all of your pieces. You want to be running Glass Cannon or Perfect Glass Cannon, and Vigilance or Perfect Vigilance. Fox's Prayer gives you damage to targets out of cover as well. And if you look at my stats here, including my watch, I'm sat at 50% and 196.9, which is admittedly very high. It's you're not going to get it much higher than that, so don't necessarily worry if you can't get it this high. Only hit 50% critical hit chance if you have a Coyote's Mask in your party. If you don't, you need to be hitting 60% and just take a hit on your critical hit damage. As long as you're over 150 or so critical hit damage, that's absolutely fine. But yeah, that's essentially what you want to be aiming for here. In terms of skills, a Reviver Hive is, I'm going to go as far as to say a necessity. For the second skill, you want to be running, depending on the stronghold that you're doing, either a shield or a decoy. So make sure you have these unlocked. You want to be using the Crusader Shield with as much health in it as possible. Don't worry about the active regen because it's terrible on a low armor build. And you want to run a decoy. Just get as much health and duration on that as possible with the mods. Decoys are really effective at taking drones, the exploding drones, off of you. And You know, even a skill tier 0 drone can tank 2 to 3 exploding drones, so that's really good. And the shield is just for when you're not in cover, which does happen quite a lot in these. You want to be pushing out with your shields as much as possible. These work really well with BTSU gloves on the healer, which I'll come to in a second. So revive a high for your first skill, and your second you're just going to be flicking between a decoy and a shield. That's pretty much it for this build. Sharpshooter is, I will say, a necessity. It gives you a lot of extra damage with your rifles to headshots. So you get this perk here, which is really good. You get your increased reacquisition of targets, which I really like. So you can do what's called snapshotting, which is where you sort of aim in and out very quickly onto a target, and then you know, your aim assist pulls you straight into their center of mass. It's really good. And you get the 15% increased headshot damage with rifles. That's really strong. You also get the ammo regen when you're sat in cover as well, so you don't need to worry about running low on ammo. But yeah, that's kind of the only reason you want to run this. This is quite good as well, actually. All group members that are closer to the enemies, and you get 10% headshot damage. So, as with most legendaries, you do generally want a DPS guy at the back and one at the front, and that'll just help with the headshot damage there. Make sure you're speccing into the weapons that you're using as well, so you definitely want the rifle damage on there. And that's pretty much it for the DPS build. So just a quick overview there if you do want to screenshot it. The only thing actually I might consider suggesting as well is farming for an orbit, but to be fair, just any pistol with finish is really good. If an enemy is low, you can switch to your pistol and give yourself an extra 35 to 40% critical hit damage, but to be fair, I wouldn't worry about that. In legendary content, you're not going to really want to worry too much about swapping out your weapons and calling out for the kill. It's a nice thing to have, and it works in general PvE content really well. But the other pieces here I would say are crucial. Only really Coyote's Mask you want to consider swapping out. So that's the DPS build. If we go into the next one, heals. Okay, so if you are relatively new to legendary content, or if you and your clan are having a bit of a rough time clearing it, I would absolutely consider, in fact I would go as far as to recommend running a healer. They do make it very easy. We do all of our legendaries in less than an hour now, and running a healer will maybe make it take more like an hour and a half. But if it's an hour and a half of you completing it and getting a bighorn at the end versus some sub 1 hour runs that you wipe at the end because your team aren't optimized or experienced enough, well then obviously you're better taking the extra time. You know, slow and steady win the race and all that. So the weapons of choice here are anything with Reformation on. This skill here is really important for this build. Which weapon you use is completely irrelevant. It really doesn't make a difference. Just pick what you're comfortable with. I have chosen a G28 because of all the sniper rifles, it has a huge mag, 40 in the mag with the 20 mag mod add-on, and I actually run this with Opportunistic. This is a little bit niche. I'm quite experienced at Legendaries, so I swapped to Opportunistic because it helps my team out, but what I would recommend if you are starting is to go for Overclock as your first choice talent, or Safeguard. I don't really recommend Safeguard because it gives you 100% healing when you're at full armor, and I personally feel that that's overheals. You know, if you've got 2 DPS with glass cannon, they're going to get one shot by anything, and you can't really heal through it if they get hit by a drone or something. At least, you know, it might take 2 ticks of your hive instead of 1. So I think Overclock is the best in slot here. Allies within 7 meters of your deployed skills gain 25% reload speed, really good for the M1A as it has terrible reload, and reduces their active cooldowns by 0.2 seconds each second, so basically 20%, really good for your CC guy. So that'll be my backpack talent of choice, but I like Opportunistic here because I'm very comfortable running healer on the legendaries, and you know, I can apply a 10% damage resistance debuff to all of my enemies, and I can still apply Reformation. The second weapon of choice is 100% Sweet Dreams Lullaby. This allows you to insta-kill any red or purple bar when they're rushing you. You know, you're not going to be doing much damage here, but this is a free kill, and if anything rushes you, it is absolutely your job to just go and give them a quick slap to kill them. Don't put yourself in harm's way, of course, but you're not going to be using any other weapon than your Reformation for the most part, so yeah, a Lullaby, Sweet Dreams is really good here. If you don't have this, another great option to run is the Grudge, which has Perfect Vindictive. Any enemy that you kill with the status effect applied to them grants your team 18% critical hit damage and chance. I haven't got one on me at the moment. Now, you don't do much damage as a healer, so it's your job there just to call out if an enemy is low and just say, oh, guys, let me kill this, because then you'll give your team a big weapon damage buff over like 20 seconds or something. But to be fair, that's pretty niche. I would just stick with the Lullaby Sweet Dreams. You want to be running 3-piece Alps, 2-piece Murakami. So the 3-piece Alps gives you repair skills, skill duration, and skill haste. You probably notice here I'm running 2 out of 3, and that's only because the first tier of Hana-Yu, 10% skill haste, is the same as the third tier of Alps. So, 2 Alps and 1 Hana is fine. Skill duration, if you don't know this, actually applies to your chem launcher. If you look to the right there, you'll see the cloud duration is 8 seconds. That is buffed by skill duration, so you actually heal more over time. My armor on this one here, my armor repair is 1.1 million, and this is without safeguard, by the way. So if anyone tells you need safeguard, it's absolutely not true. I can heal up a DPS way more than they need, just from an instant chem heal there. And my hive does 343 per tick, and this is constantly firing out charges. I'm sat with 36 charges, I think. Yep. So yeah, with Reformation, you're only going to buff that even further. The 2-piece Murakami also gives you extra skill duration and repair skills. So the repair duration is really strong with this build. The chem launcher does do a lot of heals over time. And with your hive as well, yes, it has charges, but it also has a cooldown. So if you see now my hive is orange, that will slowly drain. And to reset that, even if I've got a lot of charges, you just pick it up and replace it back down again. So it just helps to keep it up as long as possible. With regards to the chem heal, you can already see how massive that radius is. That's going to stay there for 8 seconds. This is with no buffs applied, this is just my build. So, yeah, it's, the chem heal lasts for a long time. So as I say, you want the 3-piece Alps and 2-piece Murakami, or a Hana-Yu in replacement of the third Alps. BTSU, I would go as far as to say, is absolutely a necessity here. If you don't have them, you can run Acostas. But, the whole point of this video isn't to give you a subpar build. You want to be farming hard for these parts to make sure you're giving your team the best chance. So I would say don't even bother trying a healer without BTSU. As it stands, they are just too good. And with the rework coming in TU10, they're still going to be very effective on a skill tier 6 build. What this essentially does is when you detonate your hive, it resets all of your own cooldowns, all of your team's cooldowns, and it overcharges them. So, for example, your 2 DPS running shields, when you overcharge, you're going to reset both of their res hives if they both go down, so they can go down again immediately after. You're also giving them, it's either 5 or 15 seconds of shield immunity. I forget which it is now. So they can really aggressively push out. It's 15 seconds. So they can really easily push out with shield immunity and take an incredibly minimal amount of damage. For your CC guy, who usually runs an EMP jammer and a blinder, they're going to have a massive buff to their skills as well, and you're going to reset them all. But the main purpose of this is to reset your DPS's res hives. So when they go down, you're going to call that you're popping your hive. You're going to reset both of their res hives, and you'll get all of your charges back for this hive really quickly. People always worry that you don't get it back very quickly at all, but if I pop this now, you get 1000% skill haste. So you watch how quickly these charges go up. And whilst that's going up, because this is overcharged, look at the size of that radius. That's a chem launcher. And this is going to stay here for 10-15 seconds. All the time this is healing about 200 to 300 per tick, 200 to 300k. So already I've got over 30 charges left on my hive, and that chem launcher has only just run out. So don't worry about breaking down your own hive. I've heard a lot of people complain about that. It really isn't an issue if you spec your build well. Excuse me. You want to spec skill haste and repair skills into every piece here. Unfortunately, my chest piece I can only get skill damage, but that's not the end of the world. The talents you want to run are Overclock here, or if you're feeling a bit more dangerous, run Opportunistic. I really like it. But the only talent I would suggest running on your chest is Empathic Resolve, which is repairing an ally, increases their total weapon and skill damage by 15% for 20 seconds. You can run Overwatch here, which is just a flat 12% damage buff to skills and weapons at all times, but a lot of the time you're not going to be in cover, so Empathic Resolve for me is the only choice. Obviously you want to be running the Heal Chem Launcher and the Heal Hive. Just make sure you mod to heals and ammo for both of them. Healing, duration, repair charges, that's what you want to be looking for here. The only class that you want to run, and I mean the only class, I don't want to see any technician healers here, is the crossbow, the survivalist, and the simple reason for that is that this talent, is it? This talent here is multiplicative, 15% increased outgoing healing. It doesn't apply to yourself, but it does apply to your teammates. On Technician, it only gives you 10% skill healing, so that's not 10% overall healing outgoing, it's just 10% extra skill healing. So it's not as good. You know, the survivalist is 15% on top of everything to anybody that's not yourself. It's a no-brainer. You also get the med kit that applies to everybody, which is really useful. You also get while in cover, gain 10% skill haste, a really nice talent, so you can just get your skill cooldowns even low when you are sat in cover. And you're applying this to your team. Group members get 10% damage bonus to targets with status effects. Now, you're going to have a CC guy in your team at all times. That person isn't going to be swapped out. This buff just means that your entire team will do 10% damage to anybody with a status effect. And of course you do have the fire grenade and the crossbow itself that applies bleed. So yeah, you do not want to choose anything other than crossbow for this. Alright then, so that's the healer build there. The final option is the status effect. Now you may have already spotted that I've got gunner here. If you are running CC with 3 DPS, you absolutely need to be choosing survivalist for the 10% damage to targets with status effects and the fire grenades. Do not choose gunner unless you have a healer in your group that already has survivalist, because the damage buff doesn't stack for status effects, and it's pointless having your healer and your CC guy on survivalist when you're not getting any extra damage buffs. The two choices that you want to consider running here are gunner and demolitionist. Demolitionist gives your entire team 5% damage to targets out of cover, and it also gives you that you can ignore explosions from drones every 60 seconds, which is particularly useful as this build uses Overwatch, so you want to be in cover as much as humanly possible. But this is the main thing here, it's just that free 5% multiplicative damage to your entire team. Other than that, there's no real reason to run this. You do get the bleed grenades, which is another way to apply your status effects. But my personal preference is gunner. Again, just to clarify, if you already have a survivalist in your team, if you do not, you absolutely need to be choosing it. If you're not aware, your grenade status effects are impacted by your own personal status effect score, and of course on a status effect build you're going to have that very high. Riot Foam is fantastic in any legendary, and actually a lot of the time I'll even run a Riot Foam chem launcher, but with gunner on you don't need to, because you've got your grenades here. And of course you can always dip to safe houses in between phases to restock up on your grenades. It also gives you access to the Banshee Pulse, which is brilliant. You know, this disorients them so they stop shooting at you. It's basically as effective as a blind, so this is really good. Another benefit as well is you do give your team 10% of their ammo back every 60 seconds. Excuse me, 5%. You get 10% for yourself. So it's really nice for those longer fights. Other than that, there's no real benefits to this. It is really just for the Riot Foam that I like it, and of course the extra ammo. So you know that your class is less important for CC, but just make sure you're running survivalist if you don't have one on your team. The talents that you want to run here are Overwatch, and there are a couple of other semi-good choices, but the whole point of your CC, crowd control, is to support your team, and you can't do that better unless you've got Overwatch. You know, you're giving your team 12% extra damage. I mean, that's a no-brainer. Whether they've got skills or weapons, it's just free 12% damage. Since they buffed it, I really like Creeping Death here, just because it applies to all enemies within 8 meters of your target, and it's only a 15-second cooldown, and this is getting a significant buff in TU10. At the moment, it applies to the first target regardless, so you put it on cooldown, so this is only useful 50% of the time. In TU10, it will be useful 100% of the time, in which what they're doing is it will only give you that 15-second cooldown if it actually spreads Creeping Death, not if it just hits a target with a status effect. So this is going to be even better, but even now I still think it's best in slot. There are a few other options here, but I would literally just run these two. I think they're perfect for this. You want to run 2 Wyvern for the skill damage and status effects. Skill damage, if you don't know, does impact your Jammer Pulse against dogs. Simply it does more damage. Now the main purpose of the Jammer Pulse is to stun the dogs and turrets, and of course the higher your status effects the longer the stun. But skill damage does impact the overall damage, and the EMP Jammer actually bypasses the dog's plated armour and just straight up damages their health. Oh, apologies, I do have a bit of a cough today. So yeah, the double Wyvern here is really good. The China Light, you know, the explosive damage is completely pointless. It doesn't stack with anything on this build, so I won't worry too much about that, but it's just the skill haste and status effects that you want here. So it's really just the third tier that's important. And of course you do have the Golan. Now this Golan is a little bit difficult to farm for because it always rolls as blue. My advice is to, as you can see in the bottom right here, to craft them. You don't need the status effects to be massively high, so just get skill haste and status effects and then re-roll it to a core attribute of skill tier. But if you're lucky enough, you will be able to farm these. I did originally used to run the Anarchist cookbook here because that's a Golan piece that has perfectly wicked, but all that's doing is giving me more weapon damage, and that's not the point of this build. Creeping death just means in a panic I can, without even targeting my blind firefly, I can just throw it out and it's going to spread to everything within that 8 meter radius. So yeah, definitely run creeping death. Your skills of choice are absolutely the blind firefly. This is fantastic. And then the jammer you can switch off for other things. The only two things that I would ever switch this off for would be the Banshee Pulse and the Riot Foam Chem Launcher. I'll give you a good example. At the beginning of DUA, District Union Arena, you're outside. In the very first room you come into, if you rush into that room and either on the Banshee class, the Gunner class, sorry, you throw a Riot Foam Grenade or you just use the Riot Foam Chem Launcher, you stick basically 2 Chungers and a bunch of rushers and everything in place so that your team can melt them down, and it classes as a status effect as well, so if there's a survivalist in the team it's just more damage. But the blinder you really never want to take off, it's just too good. EMP Jammer is very effective. It's temporarily disabling the Reclaimer heal stations that the double chevron infantry put down. So it doesn't kill them, it doesn't damage them, but it disables them for about 5 or 6 seconds at a time. So, you know, this is really effective. And if you do have a healer running overclocking your team, make sure you're always within 7 meters of their heal hive. You see a blue line connecting you, because that's going to reduce all your cooldowns by 20%. You want to aim to have your status effect duration longer than your cooldown. So if you look on the right there, you can see my cooldown is 13.6, but the duration is 16.1. Now as of TU10, that's going to be different because they're giving a lot of extra resistance to status effects in legendary missions, so status effect builds are going to be less useful but still very important. So that's the gear pieces and the skills that you want to go for. The weapons, you want to have a perpetuation weapon. I like the Everlasting Gaze because it's based on an MK17. A lot of us have been using those over the course of the game if you're an old school player. And what perpetuation does is it just essentially boosts the duration of your status effect. Now if you don't know, so the way that this talent works is when you land a headshot, it says the next status effect that is applied lasts for 50% extra time, sorry. What just happened there? So if you're doing a blind, it will only apply it to the first person that you blind. However, it does stack and work with Creeping Death and EMP Jammer, as both of those skills apply at the same time. So to demonstrate that, you see I've got perpetuation in the skills there. If I do this, every one of those targets has 50% extra duration, so they're all going down exactly the same rate. Now if I did this with a blind, and I only applied it to one target, sorry, if I did this with a blind and I applied it to multiple targets, it would only apply to the first target. Again, just to demonstrate that, I'll go for this guy first, and then all of these over here. Just right this way so it definitely hits the... Whoops, didn't work. On target. Okay, that's not working for some reason, but yeah, so basically perpetuation works with any status effect that applies everything at the same time, even though the talent specifies that it is to the next status effect that you apply. So it's not the first, it's just the next one, and if it's all at the same time, it applies to all of them. So you definitely want to be running perpetuation. The only advantage to perfect is it reduces the cooldown from 20 seconds to 16. You know, not that fussed about that. You still want Sweet Dreams here, Lullaby, just because it gives you that free kill, so that's really useful. So just, as I say, just base your class around what your team are running. If you're more competent and you're going to run 3 DPS and a CC guy, just make sure you're running Survivalist. So that's pretty much it for the video. I didn't want to go into sort of how to play the Legendaries. I know there's tons of content on there, but I always do find that with a lot of these, you know, how-to Legendary videos, they don't really go into the builds with a great deal, and a lot of the time I'll find myself trying to, you know, squint my eyes and look at the skills that they're running and everything and think, oh, I wonder if they're doing anything better than we are. So the purpose of this video was just to more go through the builds, because ultimately you want to get the builds right first before you start doing your Legendaries. And And if you're watching all these videos that tell you how to do the legendaries but not what the builds are, well, you're gonna have a bad time. So yeah, these are the builds that you want to aim for. I really wouldn't deviate from these much at all. I know they can be difficult to farm for, but that is the whole point of Legendary. It's supposed to be the most difficult content in the game, and you know, you should, if you want to complete them, you should absolutely be spending a lot of time to get these builds as min-maxed as possible. So yeah, so that's it for the video. If you do have any questions about anything I've gone through here, I haven't really gone too much into the stats of anything because, you know, once you get the build similar to mine, your stats are going to be the same anyway. But if you do have any questions about how these build plays out, any sort of suggestions that you have, please let me know in the comments. And as always, a like and a subscribe do always go a lot.